Welcome, everyone, to the October installment of our Celebrating Malheur Speaker Series. Thank you so much for being here this evening. The Friends of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge is celebrating 25 years of conservation stewardship for the refuge this year. And part of how we're celebrating is by bringing diverse voices with different topics to our audience, which is all of you. So thank you for being here tonight to participate in our program. So our organization is a nonprofit that supports Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, which is 187,000 acres of protected habitat that sits within the ancestral territory of the Wadadaka Band of Northern Paiute, known today federally as the Burns Paiute Tribe. So I'd like to take a moment at the beginning of our program to recognize the historical relationship and the relationship that still exists today between the landscape of which we serve as stewards and their original stewards, the Burns Paiute Tribe. Our mission is to promote the conservation and appreciation of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge's natural and cultural resources. We do that through education and outreach, advocacy, and stewardship. That can take many, many forms throughout the year, and it has over our 25 years of service to the refuge. These are outdated numbers because they are changing rapidly, but together for Malheur is essentially my concept or how I think about how we do the work that we do. And in order to support our work, we depend on our members, our annual dues paying members, and our donors. We currently have over 1,300 members of our organization and just as many, if not more, annual donors who may or may not also be members. These folks that are contributing financially to support our work are so incredibly valuable because we could not do what we do without the financial support and the stewardship and volunteer support. So I want to recognize the importance of being a part of our community. So this series has been going on all year, and you can find recordings of previous programs on our YouTube channel. And so you just go to youtube.com and search for Malheur Friends, and you can see programs all the way starting in January up until last month's program. And we'll have a few more the first Thursday of every month in November and December as well. And I'll talk about our future programs after we're done with tonight's. So what I will do is stop my sharing and introduce you all to Alexa Martinez. Alexa is the wildlife biologist for Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. She's been in this role at Malheur since 2017. So we're so excited. She's passionate about bats, and we're excited to bring her in this evening to share that passion and knowledge with all of you. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Alexa. And remember, you can put your questions and comments in the chat box, and I will be here moderating them throughout the program. All right. Thank you, Alexa, so much for being here tonight.
Okay, let me just get my sharing going, and then I'll do a little intro here. Okay. Well, hi everyone, my name is Alexa Martinez. Like Janelle said, I am the wildlife biologist here at Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. I've been here for almost 8 years in January. I can't believe it, time is flying. But I am super honored not only to be able to talk to you guys, but to talk to you guys about the bats that are here on Malheur. A reason I kind of chose this month is because in maybe like about next week, we'll actually start kicking off the National Bat Week starting October 24th through the 30th, 31st. There's a lot of activities happening right now, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But another reason why I also chose this month is because it is also Hispanic Heritage Month. And I am so grateful to come from two immigrant parents coming from Mexico and being first generation US citizen and being able to be a scientist and represent the Latinx community. So I'm gonna try to at least incorporate a little bit of Hispanic culture with this presentation, and hopefully you guys get to learn a little bit something for today. Oh, and I'm also like recovering from a cold, so I appreciate you guys having this a week later. So if my voice or if I need a little rest, it's probably I just need to get some water. Thank you. So just a quick overview. We'll have three kind of main topics here. We're going to talk about a little bit about the bats that are found on Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, as well as their importance just in general. What we'll talk about also is what the refuge does, whether it's surveys, outreach, any kind of involvement into conservation. And then we'll also be talking about what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife is going to be doing in the future. What is the refuge next steps in the future? So let's talk about bats. You guys came here for bats. Let's go ahead and have some a little bit of fun for right now. So let's talk about a little bit of fun facts. First off, bats are the only flying mammal. I think that's amazing. I love that about bats. I think that's probably why it's one of my favorite species a little bit, other than I'm originally from the Southwest. I have a bias there too with Carlsbad Caverns. I've pretty much lived in there. Other than that, there's about 1,400 species of bats worldwide. There's actually unfortunately declining due through diseases and other threats that is going on, but it is the second highest order of mammal species and diverse, which I think is phenomenal. Something I found out recently is, they are slow reproducers, but females can actually take responsibility and be like, you know what, if I don't want to be pregnant right now, I can actually pause that, which I found that was a really fun fact. They are slow reproducers and they're small little mammals, but ironically they're living life because they're not like rodents where they have a short lifespan. They can live up to 22 to 41 years in the wild, which I think is phenomenal. Something also to take under consideration, because they're slow reproducers, usually they only have one pup a year, so it takes a really long time. They range in size from the smallest bat being as big as your thumbnail, which you can see right here in one of the photos. You have this bumblebee bat, and then there's others that can range up to 6 feet in wingspan, which you got your flying fox bat here. So their wingspan is actually taller than I am. I'm only like 5'4", which is pretty awesome. Not the height, but the bats. Guano is a big, huge fertilizer industry. It actually used to be the top one beating oil in Texas. So believe that or not, guano is gold fertilizer. The biggest, largest bat colony that can be found is actually in San Antonio, Texas, and this is the Bracken Bat Cave. Definitely get a chance to visit if you ever get to go down in San Antonio. And just another little fun thing, like bats can actually fly up to, they're fast flyers. Some can range between 60 miles per hour and even going up to 100 miles per hour. So these are just like fun facts and just reminding yourself why bats are incredible and amazing, right? So why are bats important? I kind of want to, I know it's the end of the day, but I kind of want to see and kind of get you guys a little bit involved. And I know Janelle could probably see the chat that I can't. So if you guys could just type in something, be a one word, why are bats important? They could be important to you, to the environment. Will take about a few seconds. And if Janelle could read the chat of what she's seeing, that would be great. And then we'll kind of move forward from there.
They eat many insects. Yes, they do.
Yes. And as you guys been here, we got plenty of insects.
Yeah, we love bats in Malheur. Anything else? Anyone want to contribute? Why bats are important? They pollinate. They're part of the ecosystem.
Yep.
These are great.
All right. I like those. I love every single one of them, and I'll explain why here in a bit. So kind of like what you guys did say, pest control. They definitely take care of bugs. Thanks to bats, agricultural industries actually save about billions of dollars per year and can eat up to, since if you've been here before, we have plenty of mosquitoes, right? Mosquitoes, grasshoppers. They can eat actually 1,200 mosquitoes an hour, which is phenomenal. Kind of just shows you how many mosquitoes here are at Malheur. Someone said pollinators. That is true. They are a lot of pollinators, especially when we get down to like Central America, Southern America. I have a photo here of like who loves tequila, like being Mexican descent, I actually do really love tequila. But you know, agave is really important for getting pollinated by certain pollinators, especially with bats. So without bats, we wouldn't be having the amazing tequila that we would have now and other products from agave. And because they also eat other things such as fruits, they also they're huge in seed dispersal. So like in Southern America, you got bananas, you know, you got guavas, you got mangoes, all those like seed dispersals are definitely help with bats from eating them so much. Actually, they provide about 95% of seed dispersal in the rainforest, which I think is pretty phenomenal. They are bioindicators, so they are very sensitive to certain changes. So it's a really good species to look at in case of, you know, when we're talking about climate change or something is happening in the environment. So that is a really good indicator to use for scientists. Biomimetics, so that I'm kind of like talking about echolocation. You know, they are used because we learn from echolocation from bats and even as dolphins and from dolphins. You know, we're getting that kind of knowledge, and now we have like sonar and we have ultrasounds and we have that kind of technology moving forward. Cave ecosystems, I mentioned that as well. They guano, I mentioned about like fertilizer, but it also provides certain different nitrate into cave systems. It also, I talked about a little bit about diversity and how there's up to 1,400 different species of bats. Here's a really cool picture of all these different kinds of bats. Don't ask me what every single one of them are. I don't know them all, but I think they're cool. They're beautiful in their own way. A big thing I wanted to mention, just because I did talk about Hispanic Heritage Month, is culture. So with that, I kind of wanted to bring a little bit on with Hispanic Heritage Month and with bats. So we'll start a little bit about like Mesoamerica culture, such as like Mayan and Aztec. These two photos I'm going to represent here is kind of what they saw as a god for Camazotz. And so Kamen meaning death in Quiche, in the Quiche language, which is the Mayan language, and Sots meaning bat. So kind of like death, bat together. And that's kind of how you got the god name. Pretty much the god is pretty much representing underworld, talking about death and sacrifice. It kind of almost reminds me of like a scary story of like, oh, go take out like the bad man, or, you know, you believe it'll kind of grasp you. It's pretty much portrayed as like a human in a bat form body with usually sometimes like a human head. Also what is represented as the statue too is something that they portrayed, that these statues were everywhere, and then they would only come back into life at night, and kind of representing the nocturnalness from bats, so kind of bringing that into the culture as well. Aztecs also worshipped a very similar god, Chuli, and it's also the same, very similar, is just like the god of the underworld in a way. So same concept there. Really fun thing is the Caribbean Americans. So we're talking about Cuba, we're talking about people of Puerto Rico, all of those amazing islands that are out there. The Taino people they actually played a game called Batty. It's really interesting because it kind of reminds me of like a little bit of soccer with basketball, and I think a lot of people have seen it, you know, in history books and so forth. What's really cool about this is this game is actually made in a field kind of very rectangular for the most part. This is actually a historic field that can be seen in Puerto Rico right now. But it historically kind of looked like this, and they made that shape into a bat. And they kind of put that bat as a representation of putting, you know, trying to figure out resolving conflicts in a way. So having teams between 10 to 30 people is kind of what was used in the game. And at first it would be a battle to the death, right? That's kind of like how most cultures ended up starting, with the whole morbid stuff and how it really was. But as it was progressing, it ended up becoming more of a sport of solving conflict. whether it was a law, whether it was an event, whether it was owning certain lands, whoever was a winner, that's what they kind of went through. So I thought that was a really fun historical aspect to it. Jamaica actually also saw bats as a way of rebirth and death. And the reason they saw that is because there's a lot of guava in Jamaica. And these bats would, the fruit bats, especially around that area, would definitely eat their most of their harvest, right? So it's kind of like bummer for them, for the people, because there goes their food. But kind of what we talked about a little earlier with the seed dispersal, bringing that back, bringing those plants back, and then you get the rebirth of a new growth. So that's kind of like a nice like death and rebirth association with bats. With South America, Brazil and Bolivia had various signs like fertility and fruit with when it came to bats. So it's kind of the same thing. It was mostly for dispersal and the rainforest around there in the Amazon. Peruvians are big people who actually really take pride in their bats. They love incorporating it into their art, into their pottery, and the Moche people always talked about the high diversity of bats in the displays of their art. So like here, this is actually like a pottery orb, and it kind of just shows like a bunch of bats, right? And normally they also do separate pottery where they'll have the body of the bat and maybe it's larger, and then the head would be like a tiny little human head. And it's kind of just portraying the idea of there's a high diversity, there's a high abundance of bats, and there's less people than the high abundance, if that makes any sense. Venezuela and Argentina also depicted bats in a more like morbid way, dark ways, kind of what they're kind of get the name for. They actually saw them as fire bats and like would think of them like turning their victims into fire or catching on fire. And that's kind of like their way of seeing. So there's all these different kinds of theories, these myths. There's some really cool stories that go along with it, but I only got 40 minutes today, so I can't talk too much. So I'm gonna bring us back to the US so that way we can talk a little bit more about Malheur. So Malheur National Wildlife Refuge is located in Eastern Oregon. Oregon has 15 native bat species, which is really cool. I tried to number them in corresponding with the name on the photos so you could see. And out of all these 15, for sure, we have 12 on Malheur National Wildlife Refuge with what we have been seeing in our surveys in the past. Back in 1930, and historically, we would have 14, which there's two species I see right there that are in the red. Those are like the fringe myotis as well as the spotted bat were actually in the list of bat species. And then in our past surveys, we just haven't detected them. And so that's kind of why we just feel more comfortable in seeing. So let's talk a little bit about the threats. Excuse me one moment, I'm gonna get some water. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about threats because I think this is a really important aspect to discuss because it kind of comes back to us as managers and researchers of what we need to do and what we need to be looking out, right? So a lot of people know about white nose syndrome and being a deadly fungal disease. It's very effective and was firstly introduced in the East Coast, in the eastern part of the country. It has definitely taken over many populations of bats and causing a huge decline in population. It has made its way west, unfortunately, and now we're getting sightings in the state of Washington, which is just our neighbor state here, and then also in Colorado. So they're seeing more actually like really recent, like maybe a couple months ago, they had more detections there, like in the Denver area. And we'll talk a little bit more about white nose syndrome. Climate change, like I mentioned earlier in the conversation, in this presentation, they are a little sensitive to changes in climate. And so as climate is changing here, getting hotter, getting warmer, it's affecting either migration, when their hibernation times, food source, water, and so forth. Habitat destruction, as you know, agriculture, even just buildings and more urbanization is taking away so much habitat from trees and caves or anything along that line from bats. So the loss of habitat is another threat that we have, misinformation. So I kind of have like the vampire bat. Ironically, I think they're one of my favorite bats because they're a little bit misunderstood. And out of all the 1,400 species of bat, only like 3 of them are dependent on blood, and they're not blood suckers. They just kind of cut a little slit and then drink out of the blood that's falling. So there's a lot of misinformation that's going on with these bats, and I think people are just getting scared. And you know, I just give you a thing about Hispanic culture and death and darkness. And so a lot of people are actually just end up killing bats because of fears. So it's very important, which is awesome for today. Like we're doing outreach and giving some more information of these misunderstood species. Wind energy farms are a huge component about bat declining in population. Unfortunately, the wind turbines definitely take out a lot of these bats that are flying through. In 2019, companies are now have to sign a environmental impact assessment, an EIA, in order to help mitigate take information on bats. So understanding their migration, when they are feeding, what time are they eating, all that stuff. So they have to take that under consideration now when doing all these turbines. Invasive species. So to my Portland folks, I did not know this until I moved here, that you guys have catios. So but like invasive species, we have a lot of feral cats, so they end up being one of our biggest predators for bats, unfortunately. And to the catio folks, I appreciate that. You can keep your cat in its own little area, and not only you're helping birds, but you're also helping bats here. That's one other aspect to it. So what are we doing here at Malheur for bats? So we do a white nose syndrome testing with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife every year. We've been doing it for quite a while now, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We do participate in the North American Bat Hub with using bat detectors. This year was really awesome. We had quite a few volunteers who assisted in a bat roost survey just to get an abundance number of bats and see what is here and what is utilizing our old buildings. And then also what's always important and what we try to do here is outreach. We have a really cool program called Malheur After Dark, which is collaborating with BOMER as well as Bird Alliance of Oregon, and then the refuge as well, but it's mostly ran through those 2 nonprofits. And we'll talk a little bit more on that too. So going into white nose syndrome testing, we've been doing it with ODF&W since 2018, at least since I've been here. We used to do just 5 sites. Now we do 10 different samples at headquarters and 10 at the field station. In the photo here to the right, you have one of our seasonal techs, Rebecca Pickle. She's actually picking up some of the guano, making sure we're using proper PPE and keeping ourselves safe too, right? There's also other opportunities where we can do a swab collection, and it's kind of like a Q-tip with solution. And if we could see the roost, which you can also see this this photo that I took right here, I was able to kind of swab those little guys that you can see. They're actually on like one of the side panels at the Malheur field station, so you can really see them close, and then get like a urine sample. And sometimes they bite it, and that's a little bit of a bonus. So far, since I've been here, we've been negative. So let's stay in the negative. I hope we stay there. But we'll try to keep continuing this sampling with partnering with ODF&W and making sure keeping up on white nose syndrome here. So one of our biggest surveys that we do on Malheur National Wildlife Refuge is the North American Bat Hub, or what we just call it for short is NABat. It's a large scale monitoring bat program throughout North America, but we also mostly focus on the Northwest Bat Hub, which includes Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. It used to actually be, when it was first starting, it was mostly ran with USGS, Forest Service, but the main people who took on it was the Oregon State University from the Cascade area in Bend, Oregon. So those people actually really pushed for this, and working with our inventory monitoring program with Fish and Wildlife Service, Jenny Barnett, who was a biologist at the time, really try to get that going for refuges throughout this area. I have this map here. It is from 2019, but it just kind of gives you an idea of like a little bit of a product. This one's more displaying on big brown bats, and every little square that you're seeing is part of a grid that NABat did or did not do and participated, but the shaded ones are kind of where we're seeing big brown bat. I did mention Oregon State, so I want to give them highlight. We do, since now it's really more finalized that NABat is running this, they actually have a really cool Northwest Bat Hub data viewer, which is this, depicts this picture that's right here. And you could actually go in there, it's a little bit more public friendly, and you can actually see what they're seeing at each of those grid spots. So all those spots are all survey sites. They have a giant plan. You are more than welcome to like look through it. You could definitely Google it and look at what the program is about, and it's open to anyone, honestly. And so they're always looking for extra hands, extra help. So if you ever wanted to participate in this, it's you could definitely look in here and kind of see what you would like to do. So for us, we only had two 10 by 10 kilometer squares. So we'll talk a little bit why we chose these spots and what we're actually seeing here. So in the beginning, when this first actually started as like a pilot in 2014, it wasn't until 2016 that they actually were like, you know what, we're going to pick certain squares. This is where it could be a permanent surveys and whatnot. The biologist before my time actually just did headquarters, which is going to be the square right here. When I got here, we expanded it, and now we have these two 10 by 10 kilometer squares, which I call this the headquarters area, and then we have the Buena Vista area. So within Buena Vista, so in each of these 10 by 10 kilometer squares, there's actually 4 stations with bat detectors. So there's the little circles are actually representing where the detectors were placed. Why we pick these spots is because there's either like, you know, rimrock that has the best habitat for bats, you know, open waters, old buildings, things along that where bats were more likely to go to. Same thing with headquarters. They also had 4 different locations. So we had the boat launch, we had Marshall Pond, which is just right here on headquarters that everyone loves to see. We have the good old historic sod house ranch, and we even included Dunn Dam because at the time it was an old dam structure. Some bats love using dams and the bridges area. And then also there's a lot of stagnant slow waters. So the slow water is really good for bats if they're trying to get water from them. So with these surveys, I kind of did mention about the 10 by 10 kilometer site. This is kind of the photo. This is actually our previous habitat biologist at Sparks who would come out and help me set these up. It's kind of, this is what it looks like. It's about 9 meters to about 12 meters high. On the top right here, we actually use Pedersen detectors, which pretty much pick up the echolocation, the sounds that these bats are making. And so this is kind of like the speaker that it's going into. And with that, this is what the screen looks when we could actually hear something, and it's detecting a call here. We do usually set these out for 4 nights on each of these 4 locations. So it's a couple of weeks of work getting that data from the refuge. What's really good that, you know, now that NABat is actually taking on, we have our set sites taking on the survey, is that they're actually providing money to provide for 2 technicians to help go in all those different areas that I just showed you with all the little dots, and actually conducting a survey, which is great because there are refuges in other locations that unfortunately don't have the funding and the people power to go and do the survey themselves. So this is a way of getting that sample. The only bad thing is it is a 1-night survey for them. So we end up missing a lot if it's not extended for like at least a week time frame is what we've been noticing. From results from this, we have been getting, I showed you a little earlier, are the 12 different species, and here they are just a little bit more enlarged, just so you can see how cute they are. And we'll talk a little bit more on these guys and at each site. So with headquarters, what I thought was really cool, so the little star kind of just shows you where headquarters is 10 species were found out of the 12 species that I just showed. 10 were found throughout the whole refuge, well, at least in the 2 sites that we have. except on this headquarter 10 by 10 kilometer, we actually had pallid bat and Townsend's big-eared bats only in this area. And particularly at this time, we were noticing them mostly at the Sod House Ranch location. It kind of makes sense with pallid bats being a little bit more found in like open areas with, you know, like the sagebrush stuff, this kind of area not as wetlandy. But also like the Townsend big-eared bats love the old historic buildings. So, you know, you got, have you ever been to the Sod House Ranch? There's a lot of historic buildings there that they definitely call home. So the habitat makes sense for them, and why we're detecting them there. With the Buena Vista, there was no pallid bats, there was no Townsend's big-eared bats, but unlike the other site, they did have Western long-eared bat, and which are here, and they were located on all four of the spots that we had locations there, and they actually had canyon bats, which makes sense because of the rim rock area. When you're going through Buena Vista, the habitat is there and present. So when we're seeing these results, it's really good to know. And it kind of also tells us too about like management wise of what these bats are using. Canyon, Western long-eared bats actually like riparian areas, and each of these spots have a lot of willows that they can use to just roost on, rest. And so it's kind of nice that we're kind of seeing that correlation between the data and the refuge. Excuse me. So we'll go into, I'll talk a little bit more about future-wise in the next few slides with this. So we'll talk a little bit about the FOMR roost surveys that were held. There was two outcomes that we kind of, the FOMR was trying to help us as a refuge. For them, it was more also applying for historic grants, just because if you've been here, there are a ton of bats utilizing these clay tiles, as you see here's a crane nest, and utilizing them as habitat and also blending into the attics. So it's kind of nice if we could apply for those grants, or FOMR could apply for the grants and possibly find a solution in where we can also provide habitat for bats, but also provide a safety for volunteers and for the people who are utilizing all these historic buildings that were created in the 30s. So there was a survey done, a really big effort. I will definitely give a huge shout out to Linda Craig, because she's been a big advocate for bats from the beginning, and also for Craig Walker, because he helped kind of orchestrated this as well. And I really am very appreciative. And so I'm kind of using the data that was collected in Craig's report that he provided for a refuge. So so bear with me, excuse me, sorry, I'm gonna take another drink. So what was used during the surveys were echo meters. So it's kind of what you see right here, the little handhelds. They show the wavelengths of the vocalization that's coming from the bats, so it can somewhat detect what species that we have. Also, there was exit surveys, so usually there's 2 people per site at each location, and taking place around dusk. And so that way when the bats are going out, they have a clicker and kind of keeping count of how many bats they're seeing around the locations. From the results, it seemed that there was mostly, out of all the 6 locations that are shown here in this photo, mostly headquarters, biology, and the barn ended up being your highlighted of where they were seeing most of the bats coming out of, being headquarters being the most with counting 347 bats. And barn and the biology building ended up tying with about 130 bats, which is pretty cool to see. I brought this figure in from the report just because it kind of shows you from the echolocation, from the vocalizations that they're getting. They got all these detections and seeing all these different species. What I thought was cool found was this fringe bat. I don't know if you remember, I had that highlighted in red because it was marked as a historical species. So it's kind of neat that we're actually detecting it. Whether it can be the technology that was used or also the time frame, because I tend to do the NABat surveys around end of June and July when it's a little bit more peak of more activity of our bat season. And I never have done it in August before. So it could be also a time aspect as well. I think moving forward with this, overall, it gave us a really great baseline data. I think moving forward is just more talking of whether going into further more analysis software such as Kaleidoscope or NABat. And also these detections were not necessarily saying they were possibly maybe the same bat or not. Whereas emergent calls or foraging calls can sound very differently, but can come from the same individual. So there's just a lot of things that we probably need to tie up in and kind of revisit. But overall, I thought it was a really great effort from our volunteers and from FOMER and providing this opportunity to them, but also to us and giving us this information. So I'm very grateful for it. Excuse me. I did mention about outreach. These are just some photos. This beautiful photo here to the right is the Malheur After Dark photo this year. Normally this year, unfortunately, we didn't do a bat walk in person, but normally I would help assist with the bat walks and kind of just like do what I'm doing today is talk about the importance of bats, what do we have here at Malheur, and kind of walking around with those echo meters that we just saw in the previous slide and letting people see that for themselves and being like, wow, this is what I'm seeing, this is the species I hear, or from this little device. I just wanted to highlight James Lane. Back in 2019, we also do outreach at the Malheur Field Station. James was a junior at the time, and he was so fascinated by all the bat information that was being given and wanted to do more. He was like, I want to do more for these bats. And so with the help of his dad, they both created these small bat houses of 24 bat houses and donated them to the Malheur Field Station as well as some of them to Malheur Refuge. This year, we're actually able to put a few up around headquarters. So this is kind of what they look like today. We also let kids to talk about bats and talk about, journaling and taking notes and what you see in observation. So I thought this was the cutest picture I've ever seen of a kid and their interpretation of a bat. So I just wanted to bring in some sunshine there and just smile. Okay, so going into the future, so let's talk about what are next steps for Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, but also I want to talk about with the Pacific Northwest, like what is U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, what are their goals looking like in the future here? So for next steps for Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, one is with the information that with FOMER, hopefully one day, this would be really great, is if we could actually create possible bat condos at headquarters, giving them opportunities to live somewhere else that's more safer. Those clay tiles tend to be really hot and we have a lot of mortality during the summer. So, having an alternative for bats to go to would be very awesome. They actually have a few of these that were built at Heart Mountain in the past 5 years and have been super successful. Lots of bats utilize them. They also have like the rocket versions of bat houses as well out in Heart Mountain. Excuse me. Another thing I would like to do, or would be a really good resource, is possibly going into mist netting next year or in future years with help from our Ecological Services Office, with Erin Adams. She's stationed in Washington, and then Emily, excuse me. Well, she's out in the Bend office. Both of our Ecological Service fish and wildlife employees do a lot of work with bats in the Pacific Northwest. Mist netting with ODF&W is also something we would possibly do in order to understand what is actually here, utilizing roosts, maternity colonies, and so forth. Something possibly in the future wise is there's a lot, I don't know if you've ever looked into our previous blogs or news with the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. We do have Motus towers. Motus towers kind of look like this little tall antenna. We actually have one here at headquarters on one of our buildings. They are kind of used more internationally now within Canada, US, and Mexico. These antenna arrays are correlated with these tiny little tags worked as like radio telemetry. So these little tags are called CTT tags. They're put on certain species of whether they're bats. Birds is mostly the main reason these MODIS towers were created, but it doesn't stop them from other things. Even butterflies, I believe, and even frogs. So it's kind of the latest technology that's moving forward, you know, with money and funding, and maybe with some more information that we collect and data from the refuge. Maybe this is a route that might look promising and kind of moving forward with and understanding what our bat colonies are doing here. For Fish and Wildlife, I kind of mentioned Aaron a little bit out of our Washington office. A big thing that they're trying to do is, you know, expand bat conservation efforts. And that's also including a lot in Idaho. This photo was actually taken at Minidoka National Wildlife Refuge and doing some bans on some of their bats out there. They've also been really promoting vaccinations for white nose syndrome. So what they are doing is they're going to colonies of bats and kind of giving this vaccine to certain bats in order to help prevent them from getting this terrible fungal disease. And overall, collecting more data. You know, bats are not really, they're kind of starting to get the highlight of the species away from, you know, birds and other certain mammals. But getting more information and getting more refuges out there that are interested. A lot of the Idaho refuges this year, such as Camas, Minidoka, are really trying to be more bat advocates. And then so we're also trying to be in that family as well too. Excuse me. In summary, I don't want to take so much of our time, but I definitely just want to say, you know, bats are cool. I think they're great. They're awesome. They're important to our ecosystem. I showed a little bit about cultural significance on bats. They call, a lot of them call Malheur home. I used to love saying that we have the most diverse refuge in the Pacific Northwest, and then Heart Mountain actually beat us by a couple of bats. So just because they have a spotted bat, I guess they can take the #1 spot. With that, I just also want to say, like, there's plenty of resources for you guys out there. Bat Conservation International actually has tons of stuff you could look on their website. And with Bat Week just coming in next week, they actually have webinars. They have information, whether there's bat walks near you or things that you could take home, understanding if you want to build a bat box, how best designs you'd like to use around your area. Our partners with Bat Conservation International were so nice that they knew that I was doing this, and they actually provided a couple of free stuff information that you could come and get. If you come to headquarters and come to our crane nest at the Friends group, they actually provided us a couple cool stickers that say Bat Nerd and Bat Conservation International, and then giving us a little bit of a pamphlet of the amazing world of bats, and so you guys could come and check those out, and they're free. So just a reminder, Bat Week, October 24th through 31st. Fun thing I forgot to mention about bats with Hispanic Heritage Month is, you know, there's a lot of things done in Latin America for bats that they actually have Bat Day on October 1st. And then that way they could have the whole month to talk about bats and bringing about conservation efforts. The website is written below if you guys would like to check it out. They actually have stuff going on now, even before Bat Week. So just some acknowledgements of the agencies I just really wanted to highlight. We also have other partners as well, but mostly these are our main ones that we work with. So I'm very grateful for every single one of them. But I also just really want to thank the volunteers. Like, I thank you guys so much. I cannot get enough of all this work done without your passion and without your help, and coming from all over the country to come out and help the refuge and be a part of this bigger picture and bat conservation, as well as other conservation efforts that we're doing here on Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. So huge, huge thank you, huge gratitude goes to you guys. I can't thank you guys enough. With that, that kind of brings to our end of our presentation. And I'll be so happy to take some questions before my voice is gone. So thank you.
Why don't I give you just a little bit of a break, Alexa? So we do have a couple questions and I wanted to respond to them and I'll give you a chance to respond as well. So Linda asked about how the 1,400 species of bats were dispersed across the planet. And I did find a really cool website. So those of you that are in the chat box, if you see this, worldpopulationreview.com has a map of rankings by country of how many species every country has recorded as far as bat species are concerned. And Indonesia is at the top of the list with 225 different species of bats present, which is really cool. And Colombia, I believe, was behind them with 117. So Indonesia's far and above the highest. Okay, so then the question, is there any evidence that there are health problems for people inhabiting buildings used by bats? And so, yes, histoplasmosis is the health concern most closely associated with the spores found in guano. And it can be recommended to remove roosting bats from inside of buildings so that the accumulation of the guano doesn't potentially contain these spores, and then the ventilation of buildings bring those spores into where people are living or working. And so while we almost have the benefit of having poorly ventilated buildings, there's a pretty good seal, but what we've found in our experience with our CCC era buildings is that if something were to expire in the roof, that smell will travel into the building and linger, and then working or living in that space is intolerable. And so that's one of the reasons we're really keen on trying to mitigate and protect and provide bat habitat, but also protect the buildings, preserve their integrity and their usefulness at refuge headquarters. Is there any analysis of the guano under the bat houses at headquarters going on? And yes, there is. Alexa could probably speak more to that. Alexa knows the individuals with ODF and W, works with them on the NABat monitoring. But this summer, a intern was out and placed plastic tarps under bat houses and did this regionally. I believe she went all over the state, and maybe Alexa could speak more to that. But she would leave these tarps out as collection mats for guano, and then after a few weeks would come around and collect them. And I know that they were doing testing for white nose, and they may have very well also been testing for mRNA and for histoplasmosis. But Alexa, do you have anything more to add to that?
No, yeah, so far everything has been coming back at least negative from what I've understood, from all those analysis. The technician that Janelle was mentioning actually works close with, Raymond Dodd. He's the ODF and W person contact out in the Bend area, or he also goes by Ray. He's been the main bat person, especially with the Pacific Northwest Bat Working Group that we have too. So usually I coordinate with him a lot with those bat samples. And we do the same thing for Malheur, where we try to collect these samples around April, May time, before breeding season a little bit, and trying to collect the guano from the active roost. And usually we try to set a mat or something along that a week or two prior, so that way we can get the fresh guano and not something that's been sitting there and collecting dust and whatnot. So
Great. Well, those are great questions. When do the bats leave the refuge in their fall migration?
it depends. Our main bat that we have here that mostly migrates is the hoary bat. And usually around the time like September, October, we're starting seeing less and less bats. Either they're already gone or they're already starting to hunker down for the winter.
Great. Awesome. Well, everyone. Does anyone have any more questions for Alexa? This has been wonderful, Alexa. Thank you so much for sharing all of the work that you're doing and all the knowledge that you have, and especially making that really valuable cultural connection. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you guys, and I appreciate the week later apologize for getting sick. Was not part of the plan, but I'm glad at least like my voice is somewhat back to be able to do this and share this with you also and make it in time because Hispanic Heritage Month does end later this end of this week. So I'm glad I made both sections for that Hispanic Heritage Month and that week. So excited.
Perfect. It's so perfect. Well, before we let everyone go, I'm going to remind you that we do have 2 more months left in 2024. And next month, we're going to hear from Diane Tiemann. Diane is the Director of Cultural and Natural Resources for the Burns Paiute Tribe. And she's going to be giving a presentation on the history and culture of the tribe. And that is going to be the first Thursday of the month. So that's November 7th at 4 p.m. And so we really hope to see you there. Again, just like this presentation, it will be recorded and we'll be posting it to our YouTube channel. So if you miss it, no worries. After that, in December, you're going to be hearing from me. And I'm going to be giving you sort of a Malheur Friends in Review, talk about, a little bit of our further back history, a bunch of what we've been up to this year, and some of our hopes and plans for the future. So I'm really excited to be connecting with all of our friends, members, and supporters and talking about our organization at that level. And, potentially it could turn into a bit of a virtual social event. So hope to see you there. Great. Thank you so much, Alexa, and thank you all for coming.